I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. The free peoples of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedom.
As one war ended, another began. Throughout the 50s, the United States found themselves backing the South Koreans in the campaign against communist North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union. It was in Korea that the U.S. would find themselves fighting the first of many battles to preserve international democracy and drive communism out of the world. After Japanese surrender in 1945 following the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Korea was turned over to the Allied forces. Once turned over, Korea was split along the 38th parallel. The North would be assisted by the Soviet Union, while the South would be aided by the United States of America. After a Soviet takeover, North Korea began to develop a communist ideology, and on June 25, 1950, North Korean forces attacked the South Korean army at Seoul. This forced leader Syngman Rhee to flee the country. The United States responded to the attack by pushing a resolution through the UN Security Council calling for military assistance to South Korea. The United States immediately started a draft and sent thousands of troops overseas to help South Korea.
Thank you for taking this time for the interview.
Okay.
My first question I have for you is, were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I was drafted. During that time of years, they did have a draft. And when you reached the age of 18, you had to register for the draft. And then you had to wait for them to call you, and you received a letter from the government stating that you were being drafted and to report at the certain army camp in so many days.
How old were you when you were drafted?
I was 19.
Lou Donato was only one of the 5.5 million troops who would serve in Korea in order to preserve South Korean independence. In late 1950, President Truman ordered Navy and Air Force troops, mainly stationed in Japan, to enter Korea and help South Korean forces retake the capital of Seoul. United States aid proved to be massively helpful to the South Korean forces, and with the help of the United States, the South Koreans were able to push not only to Seoul, but also into North Korea all the way to the Chinese border. In fear of the South Korean troops' momentum after they captured the North Korean capital Pyongyang, China stationed troops on their border and crossed into Korea to repel further South Korean advance on October 25, 1950. After 2 months of vigorous fighting, Chinese and North Korean forces were able to successfully push back the counteroffensive of South Korea. In the process, they were able to retake both Pyongyang and Seoul while driving South Korea deep into their own territory. Throughout the hostile decade of the 1950s, conditions for troops were very poor, both during and after the war. All efforts were put towards the fight, and sacrifices had to be made for the soldiers.
Conditions were not very good. The living quarters were called Quonset huts, and during the winter time there were 2 stoves in the Quonset hut to provide heat, but they didn't generate very much heat. And the temperature in Korea would drop down to 10 to 20 below zero, so it would be very cold. And unfortunately, I had a bunk that was right next to the door. So in the morning when I woke up, I would be covered with frost and dampness, and before I got out of bed, I would have to shake all the frost and everything off. So it was pretty difficult to live under those conditions because you were never warm unless you got 3 inches away from the potbelly stove, and then we would have to, there were no bathrooms in these Quonset huts, so in 20 below zero, you would have to go outside. The food was terrible. Many times we had to rely on what they called K rations, which was food taken out of cans. And cans would be in storage for a long period of time. So by the time it came to us, it was not very appealing. And the result was that I lost about 50 pounds while I was over there.
How did you become acclimated to the new lifestyle?
Well, once you get there and you see what you have to put up with, there's not much you can do. You can't leave. So you just have to get your brain together and accept the things the way they are. The longer it takes you to accept the things the way they are, the harder it becomes.
Thanks to Chinese intervention, North Korea was able to successfully retake Seoul and continue onwards with their conquest to unite all of Korea under a communist regime. However, they were now met with another problem. They could not support the takeover of all of South Korea, as they had low supplies and logistical support. This led them to stop further pursuit of South Korea and gave the United States as well as South Korea time to launch another counterattack to retake the city of Seoul. For the next 2 years, fighting continued along the 38th parallel, both sides seeing progress and setbacks as the two forces clashed. The battles bared heavy resemblance to the trench warfare tactics seen in World War I, and the death toll continued to rise. As casualties soared and conditions grew worse and worse, the US refused to leave, persistently fighting to contain the spread of communism from North Korea.
This is the way it is, and you can't change it. There's nothing you can do about it, and you learn to live with it. But then when you got home, you appreciate it.
As the number of Korean civilian casualties approached 3 million, both the North and the South finally came to a mutual agreement and signed an armistice on July 27, 1953. With this armistice came an agreement to create a demilitarized zone around the 38th parallel. One of the most significant yet unrecognized wars in American history, the Korean War was the first of our country's many battles against growing communism in the 20th century. After Korea, the US would go on to answer the call for help in the Bay of Pigs battle in 1961 and the Vietnam War in order to preserve democracy. By stepping in on the behalf of people oppressed by communism, it became clear that the United States seeks to preserve freedom not only to its own people, but to the world as a whole.